Grim New England Tales. Episode 1. Dudleytown, the valley that was left behind. Grim places are usually marked by something clear: a battle, a murder, a fire, a disaster so violent and unmistakable that the land itself seems to remember. But every so often, there is a place whose darkness gradually takes hold, quiet and persistent, feeling less like tragedy and more like an unheeded warning. In the far northwestern corner of Connecticut, near the New York border, lies a narrow wooded valley concealed beneath ridgelines and dense forest. Here, sunlight arrives late, shadows stretch longer than expected, and the silence is often described not as peaceful but as oppressive, pressing down as if the woods are listening. This is Dudleytown, now nearly vanished. No remaining homes, town green, church bell, schoolhouse, or roads guide visitors to heritage sites. Only moss-covered stone foundations, broken cellar holes entwined with roots and leaves, old walls like bones emerging through the forest, and a land completely reclaimed by wilderness. Dudleytown feels less like a forgotten settlement, and more like a place deliberately erased. What unsettles about Dudleytown isn't what is missing, but what endures the stories. Accounts of healthy families arriving only to leave devastated. Tales of illnesses spreading strangely and baffling reports of sudden deaths. Stories depict settlers who spoke of figures watching from the tree line. Strange lights moving where only darkness should have been. Voices echoing through still woods on nights when even the wind seemed to pause. And a growing dread so intense that those who initially fought hard to settle there eventually left their homes, land, and livelihoods just to escape. Legend and history are deeply intertwined. History fuels the legend. Over time, Dudleytown transcended its identity as an abandoned colonial settlement and became a whispered legend. A valley many nearby, a void part of Connecticut's wilderness, notorious for curses, madness, hauntings, disappearances, and an unsettling psychological heaviness some say persists today. While New England has its haunted houses, roads, and forests, Dudleytown is unique. It doesn't feel haunted in a theatrical way. Instead, it feels empty, as if whatever happened there never truly ceased, merely sinking deeper into the land. Tonight, we begin where dark stories always start, with a real place, real people, and a sinister history so strange that even without its legend, its core remains profoundly disturbing. This is Grim New England Tales, a series exploring the darkest histories, bizarre legends, and most eerie locations in New England. These places intertwine documented history, local folklore, and unexplained phenomena in ways that remain unresolved despite the passage of time and efforts to rationalize them. Some stories recount tragedies, others remain mysteries, while many hover in a troubling in-between where facts are solid enough to ground you. Legends are persistent enough to disturb you, and the lingering sense that something crucial remains unexplained persists. If that kind of grim history is your kind of storytelling, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and enable notifications. Dudleytown is just the start. Scattered throughout New England are similar places. Forgotten villages, cursed roads, haunted hospitals, abandoned tunnels, and landscapes where the past seems reluctant to stay buried. As you listen tonight, ponder this. Can a place be wounded? Not just affected by tragedy, but genuinely changed and shaped by it, enduring over time. After hearing this story, if you feel you understand what happened in Dudleytown or what still lingers there, please share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like these become even more mysterious with added voices. Now let's turn to Connecticut. To understand why Dudleytown turned out as it did, you need to know its location, since geography is more than just scenery, it's destiny. If you're leaving Boston heading southwest, you'll pass through Massachusetts' busy coastal area, then into gentle inland hills, and finally into northwestern Connecticut. This region feels quite different from the typical urban Northeast associated with Connecticut. It's not Hartford or New Haven nor the shoreline. Instead, it's the historic upland country stone walls winding through woods, narrow roads winding between ridges, colonial villages with white clapboard churches, vast forests stretching in every direction, and rugged mountain terrain where early settlers often struggled just to survive. Cornwall is situated in that landscape, nestled within Litchfield County, close to New York State. The region feels more like Appalachia than coastal New England, characterized by steep wooded slopes, deep valleys, old ironworking areas, and forests so dense that they seem dim and enclosed even in daylight. The area includes a region historically associated with dark entry forest. The name might sound fictional, but is rooted in local geography and regional descriptions. Dark entry isn't just forest. It's terrain that curves inward with narrow valleys, steep ridges, dense hardwood canopies, rocky outcrops, and low mists swirling in hollows. Mountain tunnels cause wind to move strangely, and winter shadows appear early and linger late. Even in summer, parts of the woods feel cool, dim, and hushed. Then there is Dudleytown itself, situated near the base of Bald Mountain, Coltsfoot Mountain, and Mohawk Mountain, enclosed in a kind of natural bowl that creates not only isolation but a strange environmental heaviness, a stillness that has been described for centuries as noticeably different from the woods beyond it. Modern visitors, especially those who arrived before stricter enforcement, often describe an intangible but consistent feeling, crossing an invisible boundary into the area. It's not dramatic or theatrical, nor is it the sudden appearance of ghosts or spirits. Instead, it's subtler. The woods suddenly become unnaturally quiet, birdsong abruptly ceases, and there's an instinctive urge to look over your shoulder. People report feeling watched without seeing anything, experiencing quiet panic for no apparent reason, and having a deeply irrational yet vivid sense that they should leave immediately. Some dismiss this as suggestion. Others attribute it to environmental factors like magnetic anomalies, acoustics, isolation, or psychological effects of enclosed woodland. Some believe it's something else entirely. No matter the explanation, ghosts, curses, folklore, environmental psychology, or nothing supernatural. Most agree Dudleytown doesn't feel like ordinary woods, even when people still live there. This raises a crucial historical question. Why would anyone choose to settle there initially? To modernize, Dudleytown is unsettling not just because it was abandoned or became haunted in stories, but because anyone initially saw that valley narrow, shaded, beneath steep slopes, surrounded by thick forest on rough terrain with rocky soil and long, harsh winters, and believed it could support a family. And yet in the middle of the 18th century, that is exactly what happened. Because colonial New England was built by people whose relationship to hardship was very different from our own. Men and women who understood survival not as comfort but as endurance, and who were willing to carve homes out of places that seemed almost actively hostile to human settlement simply because land, however difficult, represented possibility. To understand why settlers moved into places like Cornwall, Connecticut. This helps recall what New England was evolving into during the 1740s. Coastal settlements were becoming crowded and prime agricultural land was in high demand. Family inheritance often left younger sons and newly married couples with limited property. Despite its rough and uncertain nature, the frontier presented opportunities. Northwestern Connecticut, though mountainous and challenging, held something valuable: underground iron. In 18th century New England, there was a strong demand for iron, and the area around Cornwall became famous for its high-quality ore. These deposits were so abundant that Cornwall grew into a major iron-producing hub in colonial America, providing materials for tools, household items, military equipment, and industrial expansion across the region. However, iron production required significant labor, charcoal, and timber for woodcutting. Roads had to be carved through dense forests, and settlements small clusters of homes for workers, farmers, tradespeople, and families were vital for survival in this developing industry. This was not the refined village life of New England with its tidy greens and white churches, but frontier life, raw, demanding, and isolated. Homes were simple wooden structures built manually. Winters were severe and loneliness was constant. Medical care was scarce and injuries could be fatal. Illness spread quickly and food security depended on unpredictable weather, hunting, crops, and storage in rocky soil. Death and hardship were common, yet people persisted because land symbolized hope. This hope drew settlers to the valley that would become Dudleytown. Not recklessness, but hope drove them. This makes what came after particularly unsettling. What developed was not just typical frontier struggle, but an accumulation of tragedies that, over time, seemed eerily linked to that specific place. Before Dudleytown became known for abandonment, madness, and ghost stories, it became attached to a name, and names in New England have a strange way of gathering meaning over time. The name Dudley carried significance long before anyone in colonial Connecticut built homes beneath those mountains. According to local legend, the shadow of that name traveled across the Atlantic with the settlers. Here, history and folklore blend so closely that separating them becomes challenging. Not because records are lost, but because stories grow more powerful where documentation is sparse. The tale begins in England, pointing to Edmund Dudley, a historical figure who served King Henry VII in the early 1500s. He gained favor, amassed wealth, then, after the king's death, fell from power, ending with his arrest and execution in 1510 under Henry VIII. This part is factual, the rest is legend. Folklore suggests Edmund Dudley's execution started a curse, a legacy of ruin, betrayal, violence, madness, and untimely death. Believed to follow the family line across generations and oceans. Though it's debated whether the Connecticut settlers of Dudleytown were truly linked to this bloodline. Folklore thrives on repetition and coincidence. The repeated tragedies, deaths, collapses, illness, strange disturbances, sudden departures, mental instability, fuel the belief that these events are interconnected, not mere coincidences. Initially isolated incidents gradually form a pattern demonstrating how curses evolve, not through magic but through storytelling momentum. And in isolated colonial communities where darkness was deep, winters were long, and the wilderness beyond the candlelight remained vast and unknowable. Stories were not entertainment, they were warnings. Once Dudleytown became associated with a curse, every tragedy that followed carried added weight, and every strange event was no longer simply strange. It became evidence, not definitive proof, but enough to influence those living there. This distinction was important because belief can alter behavior, and fear often distorts reality even when its source is unclear. If Dudleytown's darkness had been just rumor, it might have quietly become part of local folklore. However, its reputation persisted because the stories expanded beyond whispered tales of cursed bloodlines. People started reporting more immediate experiences, something in the woods, sightings, and sounds. And before those stories took hold, Dudleytown suffered its first grim blows, the kinds of deaths and losses that can happen anywhere, but which in that valley began arriving with unsettling regularity. Every frontier settlement in colonial New England experienced suffering. Disease spread rapidly in tightly knit households. Infections that are now treatable often proved fatal. A poor harvest could leave families weakened before winter arrived. Childbirth was perilous. Accidents involving axes, horses, wagons, and tools were frequent. Exposure, fire, and isolation also claimed lives. Death was a common occurrence. What made Dudleytown unusual was the feeling reported again and again in local retellings. That suffering there gathered in clusters, striking families with a severity and repetition that felt deeply disproportionate, as though the valley was somehow collecting misery. Stories circulated about households losing multiple family members in rapid succession. sickness spreading swiftly through homes, and newcomers arriving healthy only to weaken physically or psychologically in a short time. Some settlers became convinced that the forest surrounding them was watching. Initially, these stories might have had simple explanations: tuberculosis, pneumonia, influenza, contaminated water, ergot poisoning, carbon exposure, frontier isolation, grief, exhaustion, depression, and fear. All are plausible and grounded in history. However, there's an unsettling pattern in later accounts. A strange progression, a growing unease that often preceded collapse, as if people sensed something was wrong before they could identify it. Some claimed to see movement between trees that ceased the moment they looked. Others reported pale lights drifting through the woods where no lantern should have been. Some heard voices never clear enough to understand, but close enough to raise the hair on their necks. Most unsettling were reports from people unable to describe any specific phenomenon, only a profound certainty that staying there was dangerous. Not merely uncomfortable, but dangerous. An instinctive dread grips the body before the mind understands why. This sensation, irrational, powerful, and intensely physical, recurs in stories about Dudleytown, from early settlement legends to modern accounts, as if the valley leaves behind more than just tales, an actual physical feeling. Once a place earns that reputation, shadows seem longer, unexplained sounds feel more charged, and deaths acquire symbolic weight. Every coincidence begins to seem intentional. This was exactly what occurred in Dudleytown. The events that followed shifted local fears from mere rumors into something darker, an emerging belief that whatever haunted the valley was not just atmospheric or bad luck, but something active, vigilant, and disturbingly close. By the time Dudleytown's reputation hardened into a local warning, the stories related to the valley started to change in a way that made them more unsettling. Not because they became louder or more dramatic, but because they became oddly consistent in tone. Different families, different years, different people living mostly in isolation. And yet descriptions began to emerge with a troubling similarity, as though separate witnesses struggled to describe encounters with the same disturbing pattern. The earliest accounts were often too vague to count as sightings by today's standards. People did not report obvious ghosts floating through cemeteries or glowing apparitions in open fields. Instead, their descriptions were more subtle and, in many ways, more unsettling because of that subtlety. Unexplained movements where none should have been, shapes appearing at the edge of peripheral vision, the unmistakable feeling that something was standing among the trees just beyond clear sight, not retreating when seen, not advancing, just remaining still, quiet and watching. Hunters recounted moments deep in the woods when they suddenly became aware, with complete certainty, that they were no longer alone, even when the forest appeared empty. Woodcutters reported hearing footsteps in fallen leaves behind them, only to turn and find nothing, then hearing the same crunching sound from another direction, as if something had circled them unseen. Settlers observed dark, silent shapes moving between tree trunks at dusk, too large for deer, too upright for normal animals, fleeting and always gone when chased. At night, sightings grew stranger. Lantern-like lights drifted through dense, pathless woods where no travelers would be after dark. Strange, pale glows low to the ground that vanished and reappeared as if unaffected by distance. Some described bluish-white, faint but clear lights hovering briefly before fading into darkness. Others saw warm amber glows resembling lamps carried through the trees, yet no footsteps or voices accompanied them, and no sign of another person. Sounds also filled the woods, quiet enough to doubt, yet unsettling, whispering just beyond hearing. A voice subtly calling one's name from the forest's edge, and branches snapping in deliberate sequences like slow, measured footsteps outside the firelight. Late at night, knocking on cabin walls occurred without anyone outside, and later accounts mentioned faint, distant laughter that seemed out of place in the wilderness after dark. Late at night, knocking sounds on the cabin walls occurred when no one was outside, and sometimes, according to later accounts, there was soft, distant laughter that felt out of place in the deep wilderness after dark. The most unsettling stories from Dudleytown are not, in truth, tales of lights in the woods or strange figures between trees. New England has hundreds of ghost stories. It has haunted roads, houses, battlefields, inns, harbors, and lonely graveyards attached to every imaginable tragedy. What makes Dudleytown uniquely grim is that the deepest horror connected to it is psychological. The repeated suggestion in story after story that the valley did not simply frighten people, it changed them. Accounts began circulating of settlers who grew increasingly withdrawn after months or years in Dudleytown. Men and women once considered steady, capable, and resilient who became plagued by sleeplessness, dread, sudden anger, irrational suspicion, and the persistent conviction that something unseen was near them. Neighbors spoke of people who stopped walking outside after dark because they believed they were being followed. Many began to believe that figures stood outside their homes at night, silently watching beyond the candlelight. Some heard whispers emanating from empty corners of rooms. Others woke suddenly in the dead of night, certain that someone or something was beside their bed only to find nothing when they lit a candle. There were reports of people becoming obsessed with leaving, but unable to explain why. Some refused to leave with their homes, while others became erratic, despondent, or paranoid. Many appeared hollowed out, as if whatever strength they carried into the valley had quietly drained away over time. Modern explanations might include depression, grief, trauma, cabin fever, environmental toxins, mold, contaminated wells, carbon monoxide, extreme isolation, or the psychological strain of frontier life in remote wilderness. These are genuine, compelling reasons. However, such explanations do not fully account for the recurring theme. Stories emphasize not just hardship, but a gradual internal collapse tied to the place itself. Dudleytown seemed known not for quick deaths, but for slow unraveling, a chilling distinction. Because while sudden violence shocks, slow unraveling terrifies. And among all those stories, one account became especially haunting. The story of a physician and his wife, educated people who should, in theory, have been less vulnerable to superstition, less susceptible to rumor, and better equipped than most to understand illness, stress, and the workings of the human mind. Yet their story became one of the valley's darkest legends. According to local tradition, a physician moved into Dudleytown with his wife, believing, as many settlers did, that the valley's hardships were practical rather than supernatural. The sort of rough conditions frontier families had always endured and overcome through discipline, work, and resilience. He arrived not as a fearful man, but as a rational one. For a while, life might have seemed ordinary, difficult, isolated, physically taxing, yet manageable. Then things changed. Different accounts vary in detail, as old legends do, but they agree on a chilling core. The doctor's wife began experiencing intense, escalating psychological distress that seemed directly linked to the location. Initially, it was unease, persistent anxiety, trouble sleeping, and a growing belief that someone was watching from outside at night. Then came panic, sudden episodes of terror, with no clear cause, overwhelming dread that left her trembling, breathless, and convinced that the woods were watching the house. She soon refused to be alone, avoided windows after dark, and claimed to see movement beyond the trees when no one else could. She reported hearing faint sounds. Footsteps, whispers, scraping, knocking, always just enough to unsettle her certainty. Her fear then turned inward, disrupting her sleep, fraying her nerves, and deepening her paranoia. Her mind, according to the story, began to break under a pressure no one else could fully see, but that she insisted was terribly real. Her husband, trained, educated, rational, tried to treat what he understood as illness. But legend says he could not help her. And what makes the story grim is that local retellings often suggest something even stranger. Over time, he too began to feel the same oppressive dread that had consumed her, not with the same intensity, perhaps, but enough to convince him that staying in Dudleytown meant ruin. Eventually, they departed. According to legend, even after leaving the valley, true recovery never occurred. Whatever affected them there lingered in their memories, fueled fear and caused wounds that refused to heal easily. This story spread widely. In isolated communities, such tales serve as potent warnings. If even a doctor couldn't protect his own family from what Dudleytown inflicted, then others had little hope. Fear no longer resided just in the woods. It became a matter of reputation. Dudleytown's fate is both historically typical and eerily unusual. Abandoned places often become more mysterious in memory than they were in reality. Yet Dudleytown remains unsettling even without myths, because its story still feels wrong in subtle ways. By the 1800s, the settlement had gradually faded, not due to war, fire, flood, or a single disaster, but through slow, consistent decline family by family until it transformed from a lively community into little more than scattered foundations and fading memories. These conditions are understandable historically. The land was rocky, thin, and poor for farming, challenging even seasoned frontier families. Its remote location, encircled by rugged terrain, limited trade and communication compared to more accessible settlements. Winters were harsh, with lingering snow, treacherous roads, and the difficult realities of frontier life shaped by geography. Disease was a constant threat, and medical care was scarce. As economic prospects elsewhere improved over time, nearby communities became more stable and prosperous, reducing Dudleytown's appeal. This explains the rational historical decline. Now, this does provide much explanation, but it does not fully clarify why Dudleytown became shrouded in such persistent, heavy, and grim stories. These tales grew so intense that neighboring communities began to see the valley not just as a failed settlement, but as a place touched by something malevolent. Locals reportedly became increasingly hesitant to settle there, avoiding the land and minimizing travel through the valley. Stories circulated of bad luck affecting those who spent time there, with reports of unnatural accidents, emotional distress intensifying after visits, strange dreams, sudden illnesses, and lingering dread. Whether these stories were fueled by rumor or something genuinely disturbed visitors, the result was the same. Dudleytown's reputation darkened to the point that abandonment seemed inevitable. Families left and others followed suit until no one remained. Homes deteriorated, fields were overtaken by forests, roads disappeared into trails, stone walls were overtaken by roots and moss, and foundations sank into the earth. What once was a struggling settlement became a ghost town, but not a picturesque or romantic one. It wasn't a scenic ruin nor a relic to be admired, but a void, a wound in the woods that gradually healed beneath the trees. Interestingly, it was likely at this point that Dudleytown's darkest chapter truly began. Most abandoned places eventually fade from public memory, becoming mere footnotes or historical curiosities, names in old records. Usually, they attract only local historians, hikers, or preservationists interested in what's left. Dudleytown followed a different trajectory. Its dark reputation intensified after it was abandoned, which is uncommon. By the 20th century, stories about Dudleytown spread well beyond Cornwall, becoming part of Connecticut folklore, paranormal communities, ghost story anthologies, local newspapers, campfire tales, and later books, documentaries, radio programs, and the early internet. These tales involved cursed bloodlines, apparitions, madness, disappearances, and malevolent forces, drawing eager audiences. The legend endured not only through storytelling, but also because visitors claimed to have deeply unsettling experiences. They reported sudden shifts in atmosphere. Normal woodland sounds, like birds and rustling leaves, would diminish or disappear, creating an eerie silence. Some experience dizziness, anxiety, feelings of being watched, shadowy movements, strange lights, voices, and equipment malfunctions. Paranormal accounts are hard to verify, as memory, expectation, fear, and exaggeration influence reports. Still, core elements persist in Dudleytown stories: feelings of oppression, dread, vigilance, disorientation, and an urge to leave. This recurring sense across decades, witnesses, and independent accounts resembles multiple testimonials about a place that haunts the mind more than a typical ghost story. What's most disturbing is how difficult it is to describe exactly what scared them. Only that something did, an indescribable fear that made remaining feel fundamentally wrong. This ambiguity makes the stories more compelling, as genuine fear is often hard to put into words. Today, the land associated with Dudleytown is not open wilderness. It is privately owned and maintained by the Dark Entry Forest Association, a conservation group that manages the property and has long adopted a strict stance against trespassing. Signs warn visitors to stay away, access is limited, and law enforcement has removed trespassers. The boundaries are monitored, and over time, private ownership has blended with Dudleytown's darker mythos in the public imagination, forming a modern legend of a hidden, guarded, and elusive place surrounded by warnings. Some see this as standard land management. Others interpret it as secrecy. Still, many believe that these restrictions only reinforce the idea that Dudleytown is a forbidden area. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear: Dudleytown remains so physically inaccessible that mystery persists. There's no casual tourism, gift shops, polished historic sites, or clear explanations, only stories, fragments of stone beneath the forest canopy, and a valley whose reputation has only become more eerie over time. This is crucial because mystery endures where certainty cannot reach, and in Dudleytown, certainty is notably scarce. Dudleytown is easy to dismiss if you choose. One can point to poor soil, harsh winters, disease, isolation, rumor, grief, and the brutal realities of frontier life. And much of what happened there can be explained through ordinary history. Maybe Dudleytown is only a perfect storm of history and folklore. Maybe human beings are simply gifted at turning hardship into haunting. Or maybe some places hold on to suffering in ways we do not fully understand, absorbing fear, grief, violence, and despair, until the landscape itself seems altered by what happened there. That possibility is what makes Dudleytown grim. Not because we know what happened, but because we do not. And because even now, long after the homes are gone, long after the last family walked away, and long after forest reclaimed nearly every trace of human life there, Dudleytown still feels in the imagination of New England less like a place abandoned and more like a place left alone. If you have heard stories about Dudleytown, if you have visited the region, or if you think you understand what really happened there, leave your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this grow stranger the more voices are added to them. And if grim history, haunted landscapes, and the darker corners of New England are your kind of story, like the video, subscribe to Grim New England Tales and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning. And New England is filled with places just like this, still waiting in the dark.